Good evening. And firstly, let me apologise to everyone for the late start. This is the Planning Subcommittee meeting. My name is Barbara Blake. I'm the chair of this committee and I am a Seven Sisters ward councillor. So if I can ask the committee to introduce themselves, please, and I'll start on my right.
Councillor Lester Buxton, Crouch End Ward.
Councillor George Dunstall, Stroud Green Ward.
Luke Colley Harrison, Crouch End.
Alex Worrell, Stroud Green.
Kathy Brennan, Muswell Hill.
Matt White, Councillor for Tottenham Central.
AjdaOvat, Councillor for Northumberland Park.
Councillor John Bevan, Northumberland Park.
Nicola Bartlett, West Green Ward.
Thank you. So the officers that are present, if you could introduce yourselves, please, starting on my right.
Robbie McKnocker, Head of Development Management and Planning Enforcement.
Valerie O'Keefe, Principal Planner.
Ian Piedmonte Hyde, Transportation Planner. Richard Trescott, Design Officer.
Ray, Principal Committee Coordinator, Clerk to the Committee.
Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Justin Farley, Legal Officer.
Thank you. And there may be some officers in attendance virtually. I'll get them to introduce themselves when relevant. So item 1, this meeting is being recorded. All registered speakers should be aware that they will be recorded for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting. So we're now on to item 2, which is the planning protocol. Members and speakers are requested to note the information set out at item 2 on the agenda. So please, could you note that? Do we have, so we're on to item 3, apologies. Do we have any? Oh, we do. Sorry, we have apologies have been received from Councillor Say and Councillor Rice, and Councillor Brennan is present as a substitute. So welcome, Councillor Brennan. Item 4, there are no items of urgent business. Item 5, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, I did make some observations about 175 Willoughby Lane. They were observations. They did not preempt the decision at all, and they were made as my capacity as a planning committee member, not as a ward councillor.
Okay, can I get the advice of the committee clerk?
Thank you. Can we just confirm whether you'll be considering the application with an open mind and taking part in the discussion or voting?
Yes, open mind, and my comments were as open mind comments.
Okay, all's good. Right, so we are on to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of October 2022. Those minutes, do we agree the minutes? Thank you. Right, so we're now on to the planning applications. And we are on to item 8. That's 103 to 107 North Hill, Hornsey, London, N6 4DP, and the application is 4415. I won't read out the proposal because that is set out in the pack. The recommendation is to grant. Can I ask Valerie O'Keefe to introduce this application, please, Valerie? Thank you.
Evening, Chair. This current application is exactly the same proposal as the approved scheme. There has been no material change in planning policy since this permission, and the applicant is seeking a second planning permission that will be free from legal challenge to proceed on site. As members will recall, planning permission was approved in October 2021 and included the following proposals. A new modern care home facility, together with a wellbeing and physiotherapy centre, 70 bedrooms, landscaping, retention of significant trees, new tree planting, car parking, cycle parking, disabled parking bay, electric car charging points, private communal amenity space provision, and more sustainability and energy efficient building. The existing care home is highlighted in red, and the existing building on site has two frontages facing onto North Hill and View Road. The site is located within the Highgate Conservation Area, and to the north are the adjacent row of Grade 2 listed buildings fronting North Hill, highlighted in blue, and to the south are the locally listed buildings fronting View Road, highlighted in red. This is a series of aerial views of the site. This slide shows a number of photographs of the existing buildings on the site. This slide shows the existing and proposed building on the View Road frontage, and the proposed and previously approved design respects the height of neighbouring houses and has been designed as a contemporary reinterpretation of a suburban villa. This slide shows the existing and proposed building on the North Hill frontage. The proposed and previously approved design reflects the proportions of the existing one and is a significant improvement, and it fully respects the listed Georgian terrace to the right. This slide is a view of the proposed and previously approved building along North Hill. This is a view of the proposed and previously approved building along View Road. And this is a view of the proposed and previously approved building along North Hill towards the listed Georgian terrace. This planning permission has recently become the subject of a legal challenge on the council's decision to grant planning permission by way of a judicial review. And the challenge claims that the council has failed to properly apply the community infrastructure levy regulations, because the contributions towards highways and traffic management measures, that's £20,000, did not fairly and reasonably relate to the development proposed. Officers are confident that there are no grounds for the legal challenge and robustly defend our position. The considerations, which comprise of the principle of the development, quality of accommodation, heritage impact, quality design, scale, landscaping, impact on amenity, transport and sustainability, were all considered to be acceptable under the previous planning consent. And a revised phase 1 ecological walkover survey was submitted with this current application, and the findings concluded that nothing of interest or significance was found, and this issue remains as considered before. This slide demonstrates that there is currently overlooking from the existing buildings at first and second floor level. And for the avoidance of doubt, the harm in terms of overlooking amenity is considered to be acceptable and in any event outweighed by the benefits of the proposal. In terms of local representations, 17 objections were received and no new material issues were raised under this current application. Thames Water and the drainage team have asked for an additional condition that has been imposed. This is the only change from the previously approved scheme. Additional clarity and explanation has been provided in the committee report to mitigate parking stress related to the proposal. The Section 106 contribution towards highways and traffic management measures is fair and reasonable. It relates to the proposed development and it complies with the Community Infrastructure Levy regulations. Officers therefore remain satisfied this proposal is acceptable in transport and parking terms and in terms of its impact on the public highway as per the approved scheme. This is the Section 106 head of terms. Accordingly, the proposal is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just to come in, there's been a late objection we've received, and we think it would be wise just to share that verbatim with committee members. So Valerie's just going to share that on screen now to allow councillors just to read the detail of that. So it is summarised in the final 5 bullet points set out in the addendum, but there was additional detail in there that it's worth seeing in detail. Are we ready to skip on to the next page? Yeah. Yeah, and just clarifying the final point, this representation was received after the deadline for registering to speak, hence if not, they're not speaking this evening.
Members, do you have any clarification questions of the planning officer, please? Councillor Brooks.
Very quick point of clarity on your second slide. You said it was approved in October 2021. In fact, it's 2022. Is that correct? Or was it approved? Yep. 2022. Okay, cool. Just wanted that for.
Any other questions? Any other clarification questions? No, okay, thank you. Right, so the objectors. So we have Orel Tussig. Mr. Tussig, can you come up to the microphone, please, sir? Yep, yes. And you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I live at 109 North Hill, immediately next door to the development site. You may recall that I spoke at the previous meeting to object to the proposals. I wish to repeat here my main point. The council should require the developers to amend their design so that the new building does not take away so much light from my garden and windows, which it will do as it will be much bigger, taller and bulkier at the back than the current building. According to the developer's own daylight and sunlight study, I will lose more than 50% of the sunlight I currently get in my garden. The maximum allowed under the relevant guidelines, called the BRE guidelines, is 20%. This is a huge breach of the guidelines and should not be accepted. The planning officer says in her report that because my garden is already overshadowed to some extent by the existing building and by trees in my garden, I am not entitled to any protection from additional overshadowing. This doesn't make any sense. It's also contrary to the council's policy on daylight and sunlight, which is to apply the BRE guidelines. These say that trees should be ignored, and what matters is not whether one is overshadowed to start with, but what would be the impact of the new development on the light one does have. I raised this at the last meeting. When questioned afterwards by the committee, the design officer admitted that my description of the policy was correct. So there's no disagreement from the planners as to what the policy says. Why then have they failed to apply it? Why do they say that I'm not entitled to be protected from further overshadowing just because I already suffer some to start with? At the last meeting, the design officer also claimed that my house was not otherwise adversely affected regarding daylight. This was incorrect. The developer's daylight study says that my dining room window on the ground floor will suffer a, quote, high reduction in winter light in breach of the BRE guidelines. I will have 20% less than the minimum acceptable amount of light under the guidelines. I raised this in my written objections to the application, but the planners have ignored it. Why has it been ignored? I will also feel enclosed by very high walls, which will stretch along the entire length of my garden. I will lose privacy and amenity and will be significantly more overlooked than currently. There are precedents where the council has rejected developments which have been too overbearing on neighbouring properties, leading to a sense of enclosure and loss of privacy and amenity. For instance, at 48 Yateman Road, very close to my house, and 30 Southwood Lawn Road. The planning officers should be consistent and should apply the same principles here. Why haven't they? All I'm asking is that the council applies its own policies correctly and consistently, and that they require the developers to change their design so that I am not so badly affected. Why is that too much to ask? I am sure that an intelligent redesign could be achieved, which gives the developers the new, economically profitable facility that they want, but without causing me so much damage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was that. Just if you could just stay there for one moment, because the committee may have some questions. So are there any questions, please? No, there aren't. No, thank you. So if you can take your seat. Thank you. So the applicant can address the committee. So we have Mitesh Danak, Neeraj Dixon. Sorry, and Nick Johnson, the architect, I think is joining online. Yes. Okay. He's available. Okay. If you could just introduce yourself before you speak, and then you have 3 minutes as well. How you divide that up is up to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mitesh Danak on behalf of the applicant. Good evening, councillors. My name is Mitesh Danak, and I'm proud to be back here again before this planning committee discussing these proposals. By way of background, I've been in the care sector for over 25 years, operating a number of successful and award-winning care homes and supported living projects around the UK. We employ over 1,100 people. I'm proud to say we have been operating in Haringey since 2008. We operate Priscilla Wakefield House, a 117-bedded care home in Tottenham. As your officers have pointed out, the proposals before you this evening are exactly the same as they were a few months ago. And at that time, this committee approved the proposals on a cross-party basis without a single vote against it. That was because these proposals support 90 jobs, and most importantly, they retain care use on the site, replacing all of the provision in the old Mary Fielding Guild into a spacious and modern purpose-built facility, which I'm sure will benefit many local people when it opens. We simply do not accept the concerns from objectors about the design or about unacceptable impacts on neighbouring properties. This is borne out by the fact that your officers and the Independent Quality Review Panel strongly support these proposals, having assessed them rigorously. And this was further thoroughly tested in the detailed discussions which took place at the previous committee. I passionately believe that these proposals will deliver an excellent, much needed modern facility for the local community. And for these reasons, this committee, I hope, will reach the same decision as last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitesh. I'm Neeraj Dixit. I'm the planning consultant acting on behalf of the applicant. I'd like to reiterate and make clear that this application seeks permission for exactly the same development that was unanimously resolved to be granted by your committee meeting on the 6th of June 2002. There have been no material change in planning circumstances since that unanimous resolution. This is a high quality design of an appropriate scale to its context, and the very low, less than substantial harm to the Highgate Conservation Area is outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. There are no objections from Historic England or the Quality Review Panel. We have modest and appropriate height designed to minimise impact on neighbouring properties. Your officers have confirmed that nearby residential properties would not be materially affected by the potential loss of outlook or privacy, and in any event, these are outweighed by the benefits of the proposal. In terms of daylighting and sunlighting, the proposal performs very well against BRE guidance in this urban location. It's not policy, it's guidance. There would be no significant adverse impacts on the surrounding highway network or on car parking conditions in the area.
Could you just wind up, please, Mr. Dixit? Yeah.
Last sentence.
Okay.
Thank you,
go
Chair.
on then.
I hope councillors can once again support this scheme this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So does the committee have questions for the Councillor Brennan?
I have one question, which is you probably might have addressed it on the last time round. I saw on the your description that there were queries about the lighting in your basement corridors way back when you did the original approved application. Did you do something about that? Daylight in the basement corridors, or was that
the existing scheme, the scheme that was resolved to be granted?
Yes, that one
has good quality daylighting and sunlighting, both to the residents of the proposed home and the adjacent properties. So we have addressed that.
It was specifically in the basement. Yes, so something was done about that. It was a lower level.
There's actually no accommodation in the basement.
No, I know it wasn't accommodation. It was where you have your hairdressing and stuff.
It has been, and we readjusted some land uses because initially at the pre-app stage, there was actually staff accommodation in the basement. And we actually agreed in discussions with officers and DRP that staff accommodation should be at a higher level with better levels of natural light. So that's been addressed.
And also we moved the dining areas from the basement to the ground floor. So that was all during the sort of quality review panel discussions.
Yeah, I know it was. I know it was quality review panels, but my understanding from what I read was that it's still that they ended up saying something about lighting, daylight in the communal areas. I realised that nobody was living there, there was no accommodation, but there was still a comment, and I just wondered if you had addressed it or whether it had just gone.
It's got a couple of sort of light wells as well
Yeah,
to add. So we do have that in the front and
Yeah.
the side, or to the front and the back. I'm not sure.
That makes a difference. Light wells. Thank you.
Right, I think you've answered the. So are there any other questions from committee members? Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, so developers, can you comment on what the objector has said about the 50% and the 20% reduction in light? Can you refute that entirely, or has it some substance in perhaps a small aspect? Can you comment on those 2 points, please?
Councillor Bevan, I'm not a daylighting and sunlighting expert, so I can't actually comment on the specifics of that particular comment. I don't doubt that what was commented on by the resident of 109 is correct, but only to very limited numbers of windows. Our daylighting and sunlighting consultant has seen the most recent objections and has confirmed that there is an impact on a very small number of windows to 109, but the overall levels of daylight of a property in this type of location is still very good.
Chair, if I may, just bring in Richard Truscott, our design officer, just to clarify this point.
Sure, thanks, Robbie and everyone. Yes, so there would be one window to one habitable room, which the applicant tells us is a dining room, which would lose a noticeable and quite significant amount of winter sunlight. It would still have plentiful daylight, and it would still have plentiful annual sunlight. It would meet the annual sunlight the annual sunlight standard in the BRE guide and the daylight standard in the BRE guide, but it would fail the winter sunlight standard in the BRE guide. And just that one habitable room window to 109, which the applicant tells us is a dining room. And as he also says, there would be some loss, so a fairly significant loss of sun on the ground to his garden, but as noted, as I said at the previous committee, that garden currently doesn't meet the BRE standard for sun on the ground, and it would not meet it by even more than it currently doesn't meet it.
Okay, all right. So do members have any other questions? No? Okay, so we'll now move to the recommendation, and I'd like to ask Robbie McKnocker to confirm the recommendation with a summary. Any changes, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, recommendation is to grant subject to section 106 as set out in the report and with the amendments set out in the addendum. Thank you.
Okay, so now move to the vote. So all those in favour of granting this? Okay, that was carried unanimously, so no one opposed and no abstentions. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. We will Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to item 9, which is 175 Willoughby Lane, N17ORX, pages 263 to 392 in the pack, and the reference is 0664. I won't read out the proposal that's in the pack, but the recommendation is to grant. So if I can hand over to the planning officer, Sarah Madondo, to introduce this application, please.
Good evening, Chair. My name is Sarah Madondo. The proposal is for demolition of existing buildings on site, redevelopment of the land to the west of Willoughby Lane and Dyson Road, for the erection of a modern employment premises to provide flexible employment space across use classes E, light industrial, B2 and B8, with auxiliary offices, car parking, service yard areas, landscaping and associated works. Next. So on this slide, you'll see the site highlighted in red. So that's 175 Willoughby Lane. This slide shows the overall distance of the existing site to the surrounding areas. To the north of the site is Middleham Road, where the nearest residential properties are located. To the south is Brentwood Road. To the east is Dyson Road, where the access will be retained. And to the west is the industrial area, the Redcorn site. Also to the northeast of the site is the Meridian regeneration area. So on this slide, we see it's a photographic aerial view of existing site. Just want to highlight some of the buildings that are similar. As you can see, to the northwest, to the northern boundary, you will see the residential areas on Middleham Road, and you'll see our site over here, and then the Redcorn site behind it with all the cars. And then on Brentwood Road, you've got similar developments around there. The next slide is just basically a photograph of the view on the corner of Brentwood Road and Dyson Road. So again, our site is just on the corner there of Brentwood Road and Dyson Road. The next photograph is just showing north towards the site on Dyson Road, so leading on to the residential areas. On the next slide, you'll see the buildings marked in green. So I just want to highlight the green is the 2 new proposed buildings, and the orange marks the existing buildings. So as you can see from this existing and proposed overlay, you will note that the green buildings, which are going to be new, are set back away from the residential properties on Middle Lane. And then the purple is showing the public footway. On the next slide, you will see the, it's basically showing the layout of the 2 buildings, showing the central parking. So you've got the units will be 1 to 7, and then they'll have a central parking in the middle. In the next slide, you will see examples which are similar to the proposed site on Brentwood Road. So you've got 2 buildings either side laid as 2 terraces, and then in the middle, you've got the central parking. On the next slide, you'll see access into Brentwood Road, which is very similar to the application site. So the main issues are the principle of development, design and appearance, the impact on the amenity of adjoining occupiers, parking, highways, energy, and climate change. In terms of the principle of development, it's acceptable a site is located within a designated strategic industrial land. The redevelopment of the site will result in a net increase in internal floor space, thereby supporting the intensification of existing employment site. The proposed development will provide jobs for local residents, boost the economy, and is supported by the council's regeneration aims. On this side, the next slide, we'll be looking at, it's a proposed aerial view of the new buildings. Excuse me. So on this, you'll see the two buildings either side, one on the northern boundary with Middleham Road. So on here, I also want to point out the design of the buildings is very much comparable to the previous slide that I showed you. And also in terms of the roof, it's going to have solar panels. And also on here, you can see the central parking, and you can see some amenity spaces that will be provided. And also generally the buildings around that area. On the next slide, it shows the use of brickwork on Dyson Road frontage and the grey cladding, which is similar to the industrial buildings within the area. The southern and the eastern elevations of Unit 1 to 3 and the eastern elevations of Unit 4 to 7 have been amended to incorporate additional brick features using a buff brick to provide more variety in materials as well as a greater relief and visual interest. On the next slide, you will see the floor layout of Unit 1 to 3 will be located on, you'll have the first floor and the mezzanine floors to allow intensification of site. On the next slide, it shows the floor layout of Unit 4 to 7, which will be identical to the other building. This slide shows the height of the building with a reduction in height of approximately 1.5. So Unit 7, that's the one that was amended because it sits along, it will sit along the northern boundary with Middleham Road. So it was reduced in height. As mentioned before, a monopitch roof will be incorporated to minimize the impact on residential properties on Middleham Road. The drawing also shows the central parking, as mentioned before, in between the two buildings. This slide shows the existing buildings marked in blue. So the blue on the drawings shows the existing building in comparison to the new building with a monopitched roof on the northern boundary. The dashed lines in black indicates the height of the buildings before the amendments. So you can see that the building has been amended and reduced in height. Next slide. On this slide, you see the elevation to the northern boundary along Middleham Road residence. And note that also there are no windows proposed on the north elevation, therefore no overlooking or loss of privacy. On this slide, we're showing the landscaping proposed around the site, which includes provision of amenity space along the eastern boundary with Dyson Road. This feature will provide employees and visitors with a breakout space. The boundary planting is formed of hedges and trees. Additional trees will be secured, additional street trees will be secured via Section 106. Under transportation, we'll be looking at parking spaces on site, cycle parking, delivery services, and refuse and recycling. On this photograph that's shown on screen, we can see that the central parking that I was talking about is more clearer on this photograph here. So you can see areas that will be provided for cycle parking. You can also see the frontage in terms of the buildings and in terms of the bricks that have been incorporated on Dyson Road. The image also shows landscape areas on Dyson Road with some tree planted, as I said before, and more trees will be incorporated on the street as well. This slide shows the 44 parking spaces that will be provided in the central parking, 7 disabled bays, 24 long stay and 6 short stay cycle parking spaces will also be provided around the site. A parking design management plan and monitoring of the section of the travel plan will also be secured via Section 106. On the next slide, we'll be talking about energy, sustainability, and drainage. The development has been designed to follow the energy hierarchy to reduce energy used within the development and to provide significant carbon dioxide savings. Any carbon offsetting contributions will be secured via Section 106. The use of renewable technologies such as solar panels and source heat pumps will be incorporated into the development to produce a zero carbon building. The site is close to Enfield's decentralized energy network at Edmonton. There will be a condition will be attached for the applicant to submit evidence and discussion with the network operator. In terms of the impact on the amenity of residential properties, we identified daylight and sunlight, privacy, overlooking, outlook, and other amenity considerations. The main issues raised by local residents was daylight and sunlight, privacy, overlooking, outlook, noise, and construction noise. A daylight and sunlight report was submitted with the application to address the daylight and sunlight issues raised by the neighboring residential properties. The height of the building to the north has been reduced and the building will be set back away from the northern boundary. And the results of the BREEE test reveals that all windows within these properties will achieve or exceed the BREEE guidelines. Privacy and overlooking and outlook. The height of the building, as mentioned before, has been reduced on the northern part along the boundary with Middleham Road. Therefore, the impact on these properties will be reduced. A 2.4 meter fence is proposed, which will provide some screening, and also a condition will be attached for materials to be submitted for the fence. Noise from the mechanical service plants will be controlled by a suitable worded condition. In terms of dust and noise relating to demolition and construction works, these will be temporal impacts that are typically controlled by non-planning legislation. A demolition and construction and methodology for the development will be controlled by a condition. In terms of dust and pollution, construction noise during construction, demolition phase, a condition will be attached also. On this slide, it shows the new development, which is this bit here. So it shows the new development is only marginally above 25-degree line of sight. The site is in an urban location and there's a need to intensify the use of land designated as SIL. Nonetheless, it's considered that the revised proposals are appropriate and will have an undue impact on the relationship with the adjoining residential properties on Middle Lane. Thank you. That's it for my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so members, do you have any clarification questions? Right, okay, Alex. Councillor Worrall, sorry.
Thank you. Just a minor thing. On page 286 of the pack, point 697, it's talking about the reduction of light to neighbouring gardens, and I just can't quite wrap my head around the maths. So it says 6 gardens receive reductions below 0.66 times their former value, 2 receive reductions below 0.5, and 1 receives a reduction of 0.00 times its former value. So does that mean it doesn't receive any reduction at all, or does that mean it receives a 100% reduction? I'm not clear on exactly what that means. If you could clarify, please.
Yeah, can we just come back to you on that one, please? Councillor Over.
Thank you, Chair. So just 2 questions. In terms of the highways under section 106 heads of terms, I understand there will be a contribution for highway works, which include improving the pavement around the site. Is there any scope of making improvements to the rundown public alleyway adjacent to the site, which is an integral pedestrian link between the high road and the industrial estate? Because I can see at page 279, 6.4.6, there will be a contribution to the Brentwood Road cycle corridor. So I'm not sure if this alleyway would be included within that corridor. And then the second one is the pedestrian crossing facilities contribution for Dyson's Road, Deeside Road and Willoughby Lane. I know that there is a particular road safety and speeding issue around Willoughby Lane. So what are the plans for this? Is there a time frame? Thank you.
Right. You can hear me, yeah. Sorry, the first question was about the footpath behind the site, so to speak.
It's on the side, like it's an alleyway. I think it's called Wagon Lane. I think it's connected. So yeah.
Right. Is that the one to the north side of the site?
Yeah.
That is, yeah. Well, I don't think that's within the scope of what's able to be done with this particular application, because basically the way that the site's going to be accessed is from Dyson's. So what's been looked at in the immediate sense is the section 278 for the access and the changes to the parking arrangement to accommodate how the crossover is going to move. And then, of course, the section 106 contributions are towards the pedestrian crossings at the roundabout, and also towards improving the route, if you like, along Brentwood, particularly for cyclists. So that's effectively what the 106s are going to be going towards in the 278. As for timescale, I mean, basically, with regards to the pedestrian crossing improvements, I mean, once you know the things going through and happening or not, as the case may be, then that enables, you know, the 106 contribution enables the highways team to progress that. It's very difficult to put an exact duration on that, but you know, a typical scheme would take time to go through design, safety audit, and you know, design checks, consultation for changes to orders, that sort of thing. But I mean, the idea would be that this would all be happening and be in place essentially for when the development becomes into use. That'd be the ideal.
Councillor White.
I was just going to add, is it worth just sort of explaining the origins of that in terms of the councillor's question of this being an important link in that footpath, when in fact I suppose the assessment will have looked at all potential links and routes and has identified these over that. Really is the origin of the contributions we've sought.
Yeah, the applicant puts in an active travel zone survey, basically looking at the main routes to access the development as it is proposed. So that gives the scope as to, you know, what's going to be looked at and what's going to be sought to improve. In particular, I think obviously the priorities were the crossings and the roundabout and Brentwood Road itself, because obviously from a, you know, encouraging active travel point of view, that's obviously something there's a hell of a lot of scope for improvement there.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to follow up on Councillor Ovat's question about the alleyway on the north side of the site, because that does go quite a long way beyond the site and goes quite a long distance. It's not a very nice routeway. I do think that we need to be looking with planning applications all the time for opportunities to improve existing and potential future walking and as well as cycling routes. So but what I did want to ask specifically on this proposal was there was a slide in the pack showing the boundaries of the existing buildings and the new buildings, and it was said that the new building would be set back further from the north edge of the site. So that seemed to me to be an opportunity to make that part of that walkway less oppressively covered by two high walls on both sides. However, it was then said later on that there was going to be a 2.5 metre fence, presumably on the actual boundary of the site, which would then again just reinstate the same problem. So I was wondering whether there's any possibility that that fence could be lower or perhaps not opaque, be railings rather than solid, to allow a feeling of a less oppressive feeling when walking along that part of that path. Thank you.
So in terms of the fence, we are going to put a condition, and also I would highlight to members that when we walked around the site, you notice that there's an existing fence which is approximately about 2.4 meters, and we did take note of Councillor Bevan's comments that it specifically he mentioned that it shouldn't be like a prison. So we are making sure that the materials will be conditioned.
But my question was specifically about just not really having a fence above head height on the very northern edge of the site, to allow a little bit more feeling of width for the existing public walkway, either by having the fences not being solid or not so high.
No, maybe not now, but could you, because you've indicated to me that are you the architect? Okay, so shall we finish this questioning and then you can address that question? Yeah, so there's still a couple of, and then if you can address that question when we get to your slot on the agenda. Sorry, I missed whose hands. So there's Councillor Bevan. So Councillor Bevan.
Well, these buildings are not always the most attractive, and when we visited, we did notice a similar unit on Barntwood Road had some brick build, because it was obviously a much more past construction. And I noticed this has got some brick in it, and I'm just wondering if we could ensure that those bricks match, because it is quite a prominent location and it would be nice if they could match. And then the other question I was going to ask about the trees and that you talk about, I'll take it that that's going to be on the land of the developer and not on part of the council footway. I'm just thinking of the maintenance issue and the litter picking. Would that fall on the council, or would that be part of the development to maintain?
So, Councillor, the applicant has indicated a buff brick. I think the preference from our side probably would be a red brick. So I could suggest an informative indicating that there is a condition that secures material, so there is some flexibility there. And an informative would give the applicant an indication of what our preference would be there, and perhaps some wording just to say that that should reflect the surrounding area. In terms of the trees, the landscaping scheme you've seen, which shows boundary treatment, that would be within the applicant's site, so it would be their responsibility to maintain that and to deal with litter through that. The condition on that requires it to be maintained in that condition, so there's an obligation for it to be looked after. If you wish, we could perhaps enhance that condition with a management plan just to show how some of those things are dealt with. And then there is also trees to be provided in the footway, as that those would be the responsibility of the council to maintain, but obviously funded by the developer, which we believe aligns with council objectives.
Thank you. So Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thanks. Yeah, first one's just a point is that some of the comments are cut off in the grid towards the end, like I think Heritage England comments, or they are on the digital copy, I don't know if they are on the print copy. So if we can make sure they're not in future. And then just coming back to the 278 that was mentioned before, so paragraph 6.4.4 mentions specific work as part of the 278, some reallocations, etc. But I couldn't find where that is in the 278. The 278 agreement just talks about basically making good, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm just wondering where that's locked in. And then on that same page, section 6.4.6, it talks about the contribution towards the cycle corridor. And the sentence says, sort via 106 agreement to ensure there is an improvement in cycling environment and infrastructure, but the contribution is just a feasibility and a design. It's not ensuring anything. So is there going to be improvements, or are we just looking at it? Because the wording is contradictory, would be my view. On the urban greening factor, the report basically says that it won't meet the 0.3 level, and then gives some other variables around it, and obviously the use class. But then there's a condition saying they must say we've met the 0.3. The two don't add up. I don't understand. And then at the top of the report, it says that there's a contribution of £9,000 towards trees. But then the report goes on to say there's going to be 2 trees on site and 6 trees planted as part of the 106. 6 trees is not £9,000. 28 trees is £9,000. So are we getting 28 trees, or are we getting 6 trees, or are we getting £9,000? I'm not really sure. That's probably it for the officers.
Okay, thank you. All right, so can we?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of your question about the section 278.
Okay. Page 279.
Yep.
Section 6.4.4. Give some specifics about work that would be carried out under the 278. That doesn't seem to be in the 278 as far as I read the 278 as laid out in the other part of the document. It just talks about reinstating the condition of the existing highway after the works is completed, as in take a before photo, then it'll be basically repaired later. That paragraph doesn't seem to exist within the 106 or the 278 part of the 106 to me.
Right. I mean, the 278 would include what is described in that paragraph, because it it would include making good as necessary, you know, as a result of the physical works. Plus, of course, they're creating a new location for the access. That would be included in the 278.
Okay, so the changes to the on-stream parking and all of that, that's all included.
That should be all
That'll
included.
be worded in later.
So just, I think it's split across the section 106 obligations and then condition 24. So I think in effect condition 24 is really mislabeled. That's about highways condition survey. So that's to ensure that if the works damage the highway, then that's repaired and there's evidence for that. Whereas the actual improvements are set out on page 266 under the heads of terms. So the Section 106 legal agreement will require them to implement those highways works, which will then be secured by a Section 278 agreement.
Which section is that?
So the heads of terms are 5 and 6. And I think just while we're there, the urban greening factor, that condition has been removed in the addendum. So you're correct that.
Oh, right. Has it? Okay. Right.
The trees supersede that requirement for betterment, so that they are effectively that betterment for urban greening.
So I don't see that. Going back to the first point, section 5 relates to something else. That's the pedestrian crossings, Councillor Ovac mentioned, and then section 6 is about the cycleway. I don't know where the other bit is.
So what's missing? Cycle improvements?
No. If you look at paragraph 6.4.4 on page 279. 6.4.4. Existing access will be relocated. This will require some changes to existing on-street parking arrangements. A TRO would be required. Highways works will be carried out under a 278 agreement. This would be a requirement of the 106, but it's not in it.
Yeah, that needs to be added into the 106 list. Yeah. You also had the query about the Brentwood Road cycle corridor.
Yeah, so that same page, 6.4.6.
Yeah.
It says this will ensure there's an improvement, but actually it's feasibility and design. So is it just feasibility and design, or is there an improvement?
We will move whatever scheme evolves and gets implemented forward. I mean, it's a contribution towards developing a scheme. As to whether that stretches to sort of funding or part funding a scheme is a bit too early to say, because it's effectively an aspiration in the Walking and Cycling Action Plan to obviously try and improve conditions along there for obvious reasons. So the contribution goes towards developing a scheme. Well, that's obviously, it's a bit of a, you know, how long's a piece of string type exercise, I'm afraid. But I mean, overall, it's a very positive thing to come from this application, you know, in conjunction with the crossing improvements, because obviously a lot of the pedestrian movements are going to come from that direction, from buses from Meridian Water, and obviously from the other direction we've got Brentwood Road, but that's a harder nut to crack effectively. But yeah, that's essentially it. It should move it forward. Whether it will go sufficiently towards actually getting something done is too early to say, but it will certainly move it forward.
Okay, and then how many trees do we get for 9K was basically your question, I think.
28 if we bought them ourselves.
Yeah, I think we'll just double check our figures on that. We are due to come back to Richard, who does have his answer, if you'd like to do that while we work on that one.
All right. Well, so Councillor Worrell's question, can anyone answer that? Thank you.
Yes, day and sunlight can be very complicated at times, so apologies for this. Right, so the issue in question is about sun on the ground, where the BRE guidance says that for a garden space to feel sunny, it should get 2 hours of sun on, or at least 50% of its area on a typical day, average day across the year. The applicant's day and sunlight assessment finds that number 1 Malham Terrace, the property immediately next door to the site, currently doesn't receive anything like 50% of sun on anything like 50% of its grounds, and after this development it would receive no sun. So that's the 0. So it's currently non-compliant, and it would lose what little tiny bit of sun it gets, but it presumably it doesn't feel like a sunny space at all at present. So that would not be considered a serious loss. Its immediate neighbours, the rest of Malham Terrace, are all receive plentiful amounts of sunlight, both at present and after the proposed development. Looking at the figures in detail, there's one property on Middleham Road which would fall below the 50% sun on the ground test after the development. That doesn't currently. It would fall to 48%, so it'd be just below. The applicant's day and sunlight consultants concentrate more on the amount of loss as a proportion of loss, rather than the amount of sun on ground that they would receive, for reasons I don't understand. But that's where those numbers of 2 of 0.5 and 6 of 0.66 presumably come from, because they would lose. There are 2 properties that would lose 0.5 times their. They would fall to half of their current sun, but amount of sun on ground, but they would still be above the 50%, because all the properties are above 50% apart from those 2. And there are 2 properties that would fall to 0.66 of their current sunlight, but they would still be above the 50%, so they would still be policy compliant in terms of sun on the ground. I don't know why they've done it that way, but that's the way they've done it, which is confusing. The long and short of it is that there's one property that would marginally fail the sun on the ground test that currently doesn't fail, and there's one property that would massively fail the sun on the ground test that currently also massively fails it.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. Thank you.
And Chair, if I could just come back on trees. So the applicant had provided a calculation from their landscape architect that costed a tree pit at 1,500 per tree. So that was 6 trees, multiplied by that to get 9,000. So the contribution is the 9,000 rather than 6 trees. So if the council is able to deliver those for less, then we could have further trees in the area, and I think that would still meet the SIL tests, as we heard on the previous application, are important to make sure there's a robust permission. The urban greening factor seeks to enhance urban greening, so I think a significant number of trees would do that and would be acceptable.
Is the condition just the 9? It's 9,000. It doesn't mention the 6 anywhere. That would be for us to determine then. Just want to check that we're not going to then default to the 6 if we can have more.
Yeah. So yeah, 0.7 in the heads of terms is 9,000 towards the installation of street trees.
Okay. Councillor Bartlett.
Sorry, this may be somewhere and I've missed it, but it talks about the kind of ensuring that 20% of the workforce constructing the buildings are local or Haringey based. Is there any restriction on when the property is acting as a, in full use, whether there's anything about local employment at that point?
Yeah. So we only apply that where there's an end user in mind. So the developer in this case doesn't have that on the previous application because it was a care home and there was going to be an operator. We could impose those obligations, whereas in this case these will be let and could be let to several different parties. So that could actually restrict their attractiveness and have a negative impact on employment. To support people into jobs and the opportunities this provides, there is a £60,000 contribution towards that. So where we have employment space and we want to ensure that local people have opportunities to work there, that contribution is applicable, which wouldn't be the case in some residential developments.
Okay. More questions? All right, thank you. So as there are no speakers, we'll move to questions. So can you come up to the microphone, because we do want to you to address the fence and the alleyway, and there may well be more questions. So are you Mr. Matthew Thomas? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so could you address the question about the fence and the walkway, and then I'll just see if there are any more questions for.
Sure. Well, there's going to be a requirement to achieve secured by design for the development, which means that we need to make sure that occupiers have a safe working environment that's also free from theft, and that's being imposed by the police liaison officer. So there will need to be some kind of fencing around the sites. We do a lot of industrial and employment development around the UK. It's the practice I've worked for. It's architecture and planning. And we've consistently sought to make sure that the fencing, wherever we do it, is transparent as far as possible. So it wouldn't be a close boarded wooden fence along that boundary. The proposal is going to be a weld mesh fence, as it's called, which is kind of a lattice of kind of strong wires, so it'd be see-through. So the building would have a maintenance path around it for access to do any sort of sweeping up, and also to access the vegetation and the landscape we're putting in. So you'd have a building, a path around the unit, then the hedgerow planting, and then the see-through kind of transparent fence, and then the footpath. If we were going to put the fence further towards the building, then that would mean that we wouldn't have control over the management of the landscaping. It's going to be a litter nuisance, and also it might not get us through part of the secured by design accreditation that we need to achieve. The height of the fencing will really come down to what the secured by design officer says. Sometimes we can do it at 2 metres, sometimes they say it needs to be 2.4 metres to try and prevent people from getting into the site. So they're all the considerations, but as the planning officer has said, we've got conditions to talk about boundary treatment and everything else, so we can provide detail in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. So I know we discussed the urban greening factor, and there isn't a condition on this this scheme. However, I do kind of want to ask why things such as living roofs and greening, and I know you've done the contribution of the trees outside, however many trees we get, why was that not considered on the site?
So with this development, it's reasonably small. The roof is already, we've got about 15% roof light cover to get natural daylight into the units. That in itself creates a better working environment and reduces the need for artificial light. We've then got solar panels on the rest of the roof, so there's very limited space to put anything else on there. When you're trying to put in a lightweight structure, because it's quite a big span that we're trying to create, which has got a flexible internal area that's going to be used by a range of occupiers. They want it to be as flexible as possible so they can stack things up, or they can put in sort of intermediate floors depending on what they're going to do. So we need to put in something that has very few columns. The minute you put on a brown or a green roof, you add weight to it, which makes the embodied energy higher, and you potentially then have the need for columns to enter that space. You've then got the interface between roof lights, solar panels and a green roof, and it makes it very, very hard to get some of the warranties to work and make sure that water ingress is properly solved for the occupiers. So again, these are issues that for this scheme, we looked at it at green roofs, brown roofs, and we have done on all of our schemes, and it's just not feasible to put in.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now move to the recommendation, and I'd like Robbie McKnocker to confirm the recommendation with a summary of any changes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So there were changes to the conditions in the addendum, and also an additional change suggested to condition 20 to include a management and maintenance plan be submitted and approved by the local planning authority. And we've also got the additional head of term to include the requisite highways works. And then otherwise it's as set out in the report, recommendation is to approve subject to section 106. Yes, thank you. Sorry, and the informative to clarify our expectation in terms of bricks. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll now move to the recommendation, which is to grant. All those in favour, please show. Okay, all right. So no, everyone's in favour. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item 10. That's update on major proposals. That's 393 to 410 in the pack. Any questions to Robbie McKnocker? Okay, all right. Well, you know where he is. So item 11, applications determined under delegated powers. That's page 411 to 41. Have I just read that? No, I haven't. 414. So any questions to Robbie McKnocker? No, well, there again, you know where he is. So so we have no new items of urgent business, and the date of the next meeting, please note, is the 6th of March 2023. So now close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.